Welcome everybody to Iron Revival Kettlebell Corner, and today's guest is Matt Berenc, and so very happy to have him. For me personally, when I started out my kettlebell journey, he was somebody that I looked to based on the fact that we worked at the same health club company, but he was strong first, and I went and took one or two sessions from him, but got a program that Roger and I ultimately parlayed into some certifications. And Matt, before I get into the hardcore questions, give us like 15 seconds about yourself, and just for anybody who doesn't know you, the short of it.
All right, I'll try to keep it super short. I'm Matt Berenc. I'm a trainer and strength coach of north of 20 years. Been doing everything from training to really focus on the education towards the latter portion of my career. Started working with kettlebells specifically in 2006. Yep, 2006. And have just been working with them ever since, treating them as I still do as a practice. It's kind of trying to always refine the skill and see how much I can do to improve. But just been in the industry for quite some time, and now just transitioned to some new position, new job, and also just training some people on my own outside of my new role as well. So staying busy.
Awesome. I think there's something really important that you mentioned there as far as like kettlebells and the fact that it's a practice and that there's always room for improvement. And a lot of people tend to be look for validation with certifications and stuff and stuff like that, which there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, I have a few certifications, Roger, and I'm sure many people that watch or listen to this will have them. Well, as far as like preparation, is there any like anything you would kind of impart on somebody as far as like, hey, this is where I would start you, or like some big points to hit on for somebody preparing for one of these certifications?
I mean, the biggest thing, especially if you're preparing for a cert, since a lot of them have some element of capacity challenge to them, it's not just learning the skills, it's can you maintain quality as you start to fatigue and start to kind of draw out the weekend. The biggest thing I'd say is go back to your basic movement patterns, basic fundamentals, and ensure that you actually have the ability to move as you should outside of training. So, specifically with kettlebells, can you get into your hips? Do you have the appropriate amount of shoulder mobility? Can you control your shoulders overhead? Those basic fundamentals, because if you can't, if you don't have the ability, and I'm not saying like be perfect and be Gumby or anything along those lines, but have your basic competencies. Because if you don't, and you try jumping into the weekend, no matter how much you train, you're going to run into a roadblock somewhere, and it's just going to eventually lead to you potentially breaking down, or breaking down on the path to building up towards that certification. So a lot of times you're spending months training. In my first couple of certs, I spent 4 to 6 months preparing because I wanted to go in as prepared as possible. So that way, that weekend I had as much bandwidth to learn and adapt and build my skill set as possible. So it's a lot of work getting there. So making sure you have those fundamentals, and it's, I think a lot of people focus on how much reps, how much can you lift. There's a thing before the thing, so to speak. You got to have those basics before you get to that point.
Let's talk about those. So we like to get specific, even if we spend an hour talking on one thing. So you're talking about fundamentals and some basics. What are those? Is there a system? Do you quantify? Is it something when you see it?
I mean, for me, the system that I've always followed and have done so for a while now is FMS. So I use that as my baseline check to see how I'm moving. Even outside of the functional movement screen, it's looking at the body for how it's designed to move. So I just kind of go up from the bottom up. Like, do I have my residual ankle mobility? Can I get into my hips? Do I have my hip mobility? So can I hip hinge? Also, can I drop into a decent squat body? And this is all body weight. So without the impact of load or any type of offset, can I get into my hips? Can I stabilize through my trunk? Can I avoid any extraneous movement when I don't want it? And then do I have the ability to go overhead as my expression of shoulder mobility? without robbing from another part of my body, which means jutting my head forward or excessive arch at the back, rib flare. Like I said, I use the FMS as my check for that because I can go talk to bottom, look at mobility, stability in the larger patterns. But even if you don't have that system or you don't have the kit or access to somebody that can take you through, it really is just looking at the body for how it's designed to move. Because if you're, starting at the ankle, if my ankle's jammed up, I can't dorsiflex, I can't get into it, my ability to squat deeply probably is going to be impacted, which that if I keep trying to go after that deep squat, I'm going to eventually run into a compensation and a roadblock somewhere that could lead to, if nothing else, inefficient movement and lower work capacity, but at the worst case, potential for injury.
Is there something the system misses? No system's perfect, obviously.
Yeah.
Is there something the system misses that you found a good complement to somewhere else?
To me, you don't have with FMS, you don't have a direct look at rotation. That's, to me, one of the things that's not evident there. But a complement to that is something like the Titleist Performance Institute, their golf screen. Mm-hmm. They have a ton of look at performance, specifically at the hips and through the thoracic. And so you're able to get into it. So I tend to marry those, and I use the FMS as my baseline, and I go to the TPI as my, some of their screens as my breakout. So if I see something wrong with hip mobility, I can look at the breakouts that FMS has, but for a TPI, they look at internal and external rotation as one of their standard screens. So I can go to that level as well. So and you're absolutely right. There's no system that's perfect or hits it out of the park. I like FMS as that baseline, but you got to look at these other additional pieces.
Okay, so we're adding these two things now. So if you've got a combination of these two systems, are you a check and recheck? Are we looking after each set? Are you screening every week? Or does it depend on history?
This is where there's always a depends answer there. Sure. But if I'm working with the client, the depends answer is how long have I been working with the client. If it's early on in the training relationship, I may do a little more frequent check. So if I know there's some significant limitations, some issues, so I find something on the FMS and that's my baseline, I pick the thing that's the most important. So say they can't get in, they do poorly on their active straight leg raise, I focus on that primarily because that's the most important priority for me. Even if they have other issues elsewhere, I'm going to focus on that. And that's more of a check, recheck each session as they're coming in, because that allows me to see, okay, are we making appreciable progress over time? And to also be able to check it off once they're coming in cold and showing that they have their hips. I don't want to spend any more time working on a quote unquote corrective strategy than I need to. I want them moving as well as possible and moving on and being able to train as best they can as soon as they're supposed to, just no sooner than they should. So once we're at a point where I have an understanding of how they move, then I can start also spacing out my frequency of reassessments and rescreens. And so the larger rescreen likely wouldn't happen until I see that appreciable change in the individual. And then I come back to it, go through the larger and see what the next big rock in the road is. And what essentially was impacted by addressing that priority that I identified.
That makes a lot of sense. And as a footnote to people who are watching this and thinking about SFG, RKC prep, people obsess about the snatch test, and it's a thing. It's not easy. I've done it a couple times, no more than I need to. I am working to a point where I can kind of do it on a random Tuesday. Just because I don't want to, and I like to do things I don't want to. But think about adding some checks and rechecks when you're starting to build that capacity, because most programs, people will hunt a random ass program down from online and like, oh, I'm going to start doing this. And then people aren't even examining their total volume. They're going from, doing 40 snatches in a week to 400. Probably a good time to bump up the check and the recheck. Or do your screenings a bit more, whatever your system is. But it is a solid method, and you need the fundamentals or you'll break down.
Well, you want to build, it doesn't matter what you're working on. It can be, movement quality, your capacity, your strength level. You want an objective feedback loop in anything you're going after. So you can know is what you're doing paying off? Because if you have no objective feedback loop, then you're just kind of doing things and hoping that you're getting the outcome that you want. But like you said, exactly in the example you just gave, you could be jumping your volume up, double what it needs to be. You could also not be going up as much volume as you think you are, and just going along and without stopping, examining what you've done, taking it, kind of reviewing your history, and then progressing forward. You don't know 100% that you are making the progress that you want.
Sure.
And you could be missing some gaps too.
Yeah. So key performance indicators, have some questions. Make sure you know what those questions are. I dig it. That's really solid stuff. You got something, Jeremiah?
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask, so let's just say that, we're taking this, this assessment, whatever it is. Are we seeing any major red lights? So I want to kettlebell train. I'm hitting basic minimum numbers on, let's just say, the FMS for training. Mm-hmm. Am I still able to, get into my training, or do I need to obsess over trying to fix this something, or can I let the movements be the guide and still get into my training?
Yeah, if you have your basic competencies, so within the FMS scoring system, that's that you got your 0 pain, you have your 1, you couldn't do it, 2, you did it, but you have some compensations in there, and 3, you did it perfect. If you're in the 2 category, you didn't do it perfectly, but you have your basics there, 100% go after and train. There is no need to chase the perfection. Well, there's always an asterisk to every statement. If you're a professional golfer, maybe you want a 3-on shoulder mobility because you can get the better rotation. But those are edge case scenarios. For if you're going after, in this case, a kettlebell certification, or you just want to elevate your abilities with kettlebells, just maintain your minimums. Maintain that baseline ability to move, and that's where your checks and balances come into place. If you have your 2s, if you have your baselines, just also make sure that your training isn't robbing from those baselines. That I think that's the piece is, when it comes to the objective feedback loop, a lot of times we get to a point where and I know I've done this to myself, so I'm speaking from personal experience. You're moving well, you're feeling good, you let the foot off the gas with checking yourself and doing those objective feedback loops on how you're moving, and you just start ramping up your intensity or your volume, and then suddenly things start to pop back up just because you're going after heavy press, you're doing a lot of overhead pressing, for example, and you just forget to check, are you able to maintain your shoulder mobility? You're able to maintain that quality of getting overhead, and it can just sneak up on you. Got it.
All right. Thank you for clarifying that. I just think it's important. Anybody, especially if you're starting in kettlebells or going down this road, I don't want anybody to and then you validate that, you don't have to feel like you're roadblocked or hamstrung by anything unless it's painful. Got it. Roger, what do you got?
So some of you may or may not know, Matt was the I believe it was the supreme overlord of education at Equinox.
I mean, I went by a number of different names, but
so you clearly had a breadth of knowledge, information across all different disciplines, modalities, a lot of principles. You had to evaluate, what kind of nonsense are people peddling? How do I protect my trainers from ingesting this swill? So in the process of doing all of that, you know a lot of things. What does the average kettlebeller miss from other modalities? What does the culture lack? What does the system need? What do we need to bring in from outside?
Yeah, well, that's a deep question.
I know. I thought I was up all night thinking of that.
Yeah, this is a hard hitting shit here. This is all right, KBN.
Huh? Well, we can throw, we can kind of talk it through. I mean, we've got, I do think it's important to recognize the actual system as it is commonly portrayed in the media, let's say, versus who you actually meet. I remember actually during SFG1, I almost walked out. There was a moment during some dead stop swings, and it was just not what it's not what I was pitched. You hear strong first and everybody's talking about, don't do anything dumb. It's not all about capacity. It's about quality and movement. And we must have been down there for 10 minutes because some joker didn't know how to count. And some of the instructors it was almost like hazing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I was to the point where I was going to start screaming and swearing and challenging everyone to a fight and leave. Cause I was really kind of, I felt disillusioned.
Yeah.
Level 2, you go in much more, it's a smaller group. And I mean, these coaches have breathing down. They've got mobility down. You've got some Z Health master trainers. Mm-hmm. We've got some neurological stuff. So, I feel like there are a lot of these coaches that are on the edges in strong first that doesn't mm-hmm. really, they don't really get pushed first, to the fore. And I don't know that it's necessarily part of this system proper. Mm-hmm. So, those things, what are the biggest, what are the heaviest hitting things that'll make change?
Well, and I think when you originally asked the question, yeah, that's one of the first things that jumped to mind. And it is kind of addressing a bit of the stereotype around, a kettlebell practitioner is basically that, kind of lack of a better way to put it, that hardcore mentality, that hardcore persona of it, always having to go heavy or always having to go hard or always having to do the highest capacity, things of that nature. And as you just described, the reality is, and you don't often see it, a lot of the longest term, a lot of the best kettlebell practitioners that I know are anything but hard all the time, heavy all the time. They focus on a breadth of experience, and so that literally focus on their breath. And this is a big piece. There's the power breath that you learn with kettlebells, but just even the calming, relaxing breath that you can utilize as part of a meditative practice or part of a recovery practice that needs to balance out. To if you're going hard, if you're pushing intensity, you have to have that balance to it at the opposite end of the scale. I think beyond that, really, and you see this in different camps. So having a variety of movement experiences, I'll say, I not saying necessarily training, but I'll say experiences or practices. And this goes into the variability side of things that take you out of the standard kettlebell training paths. And so what I specifically mean by that, you have your standard, kettlebell lifts. You got your swings, your snatch, your squats, presses. They all exist in a very defined plane, and it follows kind of the user to lose it approach, where you also need to be able to have the variety of movement to where if you're asked to take a step laterally or twist or rotate or do certain things that don't fall into that narrow path of how you train, you want your body to still have that capacity to do so. And so that's where I think from the standard kettlebell cert and the standard kettlebell practice, there is this lack of variability in how you're moving. There's a very consistent lift. Now, where that's started to become, less, and there's some give or take to this 100%, but you have people that are doing a lot of, I guess, what are referred to as flows, where you're mixing kind of, different movements and moving a lot of unique ways. I don't necessarily, some people do it well, some people don't. You can see me I'm trying to be switching.
You're trying to be diplomatic. And
yeah.
I have this almost every week.
Yeah. I have a for
say what you feel, say it with your chest.
Flows. I think flows are great, but there's a way to do them and there's a way not to do it. You need to maintain the training stimulus, which a lot of people get wrong with flow.
Well, and also a lot of people jump to flows before they even know the basic lifts. So, you don't, read War and Peace before you know the alphabet. You see, getting to a flow, if you have the capacity and ability to do it. And I actually don't know his name. I just know his Instagram handle, but there's a guy, I guess, he goes by Rhino Strength or something like that. I think he's based in Chicago. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's got the fundamentals down, and he's also doing a flow with a 40-kilo kettlebell. But he's got a little bit of ability there. But if you're just jumping into it and you're doing a flow with a 6-kilo bell, but it looks big because it's a competition bell, that I'm less impressed by. I'd rather see you go on the basics and then explore. I don't want, one of the big things I love anchoring myself to is kind of the ideas of play, practice, train.
Sure.
I treat my training as play. I am in love with moving my body, training. It's been the thing that's been my biggest passion forever. And so I look at my training as play and exploration, and I want some variability in there. But I also practice my skills and I push my training as well. Just being devoted to any one of those three elements, it only takes you so far. And so you have to have the train, which means to your point, you have to have the stimulus, the input to push that training. You have to have the basics to practice with your skills, and then get your variability, move in a variety of ways. And I think that's what some other, kind of going back to your original question, that's what other systems and training models employ. So like my two favorite training models are, working with kettlebells, and I started off really anchored towards the strong first style of kettlebell training, but also I love the Institute of Motion, where it's Michel Dalcourt and his focus on nonlinear movement and moving around and using the Viper and creating a lot of exploration there, and working with submax loads, because when you do get into variability of movement, like there, you need to work with some more of the submax loads and see how leverage can play a role. I went on a lot of different areas there.
No, that's fine. I'd like to actually do a little follow up with something. So one of the things I think I heard you say, and it seems to me to be a general training principle, and I think it's a good thing to follow, is it seems like there's we've got some inverse relationships between movement variety and movement intensity. Mm-hmm. And if we respect where training falls on the continuum, if let's say we are moving toward that variety or variability piece, so let's put hard style on one end of a spectrum and then flow on the other. Mm-hmm. If we're respecting where the individual training stimulus lies, if mm-hmm. we are maintaining a minimal threshold, because like it's one thing to just play with a really light kettlebell to see if you can flip it around. Nothing wrong with that. Just make sure you're not training, other than maybe training your brain or you're having fun. So if we maintain a minimum training stimulus, and as long as the total pieces of the program make sense, it's not about right or wrong. It's about where are you, what are you doing, and what are you really trying to do? Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, for the most part. I mean, I'd add in, where are you, what are you trying to doing, and ultimately, why are you doing what you're doing? Like, what's the end goal? What's the outcome that you're trying to go for? And it could be just exploration. It could be just the fun of moving, which is totally valid. Half the time when I'm messing around in my garage with all the equipment I have in there, I'm just looking to explore. I will say, going down to more of I won't go necessarily to the flow side, but like the submax load or a lot of movement variability. You do have the added benefit if you're going for a longer period of time, or you could get a cardiovascular effect from it. You may not get a training stimulus from building strength per se, but you could get a cardiovascular effect from that, which is appropriate. And you called it out, like just the intricacy of movement, you get a brain stimulation from it. So if you want to go down and move around and play around as like a 5-minute break, that's a great brain break to break up your day and then get back to whatever it is you were doing.
That's fair.
Very good. I think, I would say, if talking about training and these different whys and different objectives, and everybody's got their reasons for their training most of the time. I think some people maybe just are working out, if you will. But Matt, what are some adversities you've encountered in your training that you've had to overcome, and what are some of the things that you've done to do that?
I mean, the two biggest adversities for me have been on the physical side. I'm anchored more towards sports that involved some level of impact or hitting or combat. So I had the biggest of them. I played 12 years of rugby. So that left some, let's say, some wear on the body. So I had to overcome some of my limitations with, being able to move my shoulders, move my neck. I had a pretty significant back injury for a bit. So had to overcome that. And then more recently, time is the biggest thing. I was joking early on, I just had my third kid. I have 3 kids, at least for the next 2 weeks, because one of them is about to turn 4, but I have 3 kids, 3 and under. So, the 3 kids, full-time job, time is of the highest demand, and so that's been, I'd say, the more recent need is how I can maintain my training in the most efficient, time efficient, program efficient manner possible. And I think that's also been one of the biggest realizations and biggest things that over the last couple of years since having kids that I've really come to own and embrace is that training doesn't have to be this long slog. It doesn't have to be all one kind of entity throughout the day. You can break your training up into 10-minute chunks throughout the day. You can get a good training effect in as short as 20 minutes. It's just being prepared and having kind of the structures in place to ensure that you do get your training in, that you maintain that consistency, and you can have that progress forward.
Excellent. Yeah, time is definitely a thing, and that's one of the beauties I think probably goes without saying to kettlebell training, because you can maximize the minimal time to a certain extent. I mean, why else would you do 100 snatches in 5 minutes? You know what I'm saying? But
you have to.
Yeah. Sure.
But I mean, one of the biggest things for me that from a programming standpoint is it just highlights the need for preparedness going into your training and what you want to do. Every time I've had a kid, and now that I've had 3, I've always had a fallback plan program in place. Going into right before the kid was born, I'd always set up, okay, this is my fallback plan. I'd have my intent. I want to get my normal training in, but in case shit happens, this is what I'm going to do. And that's what's been helped keep me on track, because that way I never run into the place, well, crap, I've run out of time. What am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? It's okay. That time's gone. Here's my 20-minute fallback plan. I can get this done. It takes, because typically if you're also in that situation, you're tired, you're physically and mentally. And so you don't want to have to make any choices. So I have it set. I'm like, all right, I know what I'm going to do, and I'll do it. And that's it.
How do you, other than using our new training app, how do you like, are you a journal guy?
Shameless.
Well done.
Do you guys document, or do you document this stuff? Is it on a wall? How do you do that? This is important stuff.
Yeah, I mean, essentially outside of the app, where is it at here? I use this. I'm a big pen and paper guy. I just turned 40. I not as used to like writing things on an iPad or anything like that. So yeah. Okay. I have very tiny handwriting. I can fit a lot on a piece of paper, and so I just scroll everything down that I do, and I keep track. And it allows me to also go back and reference, okay, what did I do 2 weeks ago? What did I do 4 weeks ago? Because at this point, there are times where I can't remember what I did 10 minutes ago. So yeah, this offloads that brain power that I need to know what I did and what I need to do. So
have a plan, do the plan, stay awesome. That's kind of basically what we're after.
But also it goes back to what we were talking about before, it's the objective feedback loop, because this is as objective as it gets. It's what I did, and now I can go back and I can see, okay, I did that then. Here's where I'm at. And I also write notes on because this brings the subjective element into it. I also write notes around my kind of self-perception of readiness, essentially. So, how much sleep, do I feel like crap? What happened? Where am I at going into that session? And that way I can go back and look, okay, I'm back to this training day. What did I do last time? And I'm using those subjective notes to see, could I potentially bump it up compared to how I'm feeling now? That's why that objective feedback loop comes into play, is I can actually reference prior outputs, essentially.
Will you use any? I know of a few coaches who have done this. Will you use any of the readiness indices, an app, any of that stuff? They're devices, they're things out there. Do you use them?
Yeah, I have here and there over time, but certain things require more effort to do. If it requires me to go to another app and put on another device and do it can easily fall off the
Sure.
fall operator, and I just don't do it. One of the easiest things from a tech side that I use is my readiness indicator, and I wear one of the things I wear my Garmin watch. The only time I take it off is when I shower. It literally is the only time I do not have the watch on. Outside of that, for the other 23 hours and 45 minutes of the day, if I take a 15-minute shower, the watch is on my wrist. It tracks it tracks your heart rate throughout the day, and I'll give you your resting heart rate score. That's the main kind of tech piece that I use personally to track readiness, because if I know what my average resting heart rate is, which is normally around that 55, 60, 56 beats per minute, and then I go in and look, and I know I'm not feeling my best. I go in and I look, and my resting heart rate for the last day or two has been up to 66 beats per minute. That's a clear indicator that I am not recovered. I'm not ready. Whatever I'm going to do today, I need to dial back the intensity. And so it's one of the easier metrics that I can track, because it's right on my wrist. I can pull it up pretty quickly, and it doesn't take a ton to understand what's going on. It's your resting heart rate. If it's elevated, then your body's still working to overcome something.
Sure. Okay, that's fair. Let's move to some more technical stuff, some details. So, going through your Instagram page, I come across your swing, and your style is a little more arms bent. Now, there are some purists. I'm not one of them. Now, I do tend to teach a straight arm swing for very specific reasons, but a lot of purists will say you're not swinging. A lot of them will say you're doing it wrong. And I don't think it's the case, but I want to know what your thoughts are on bell trajectory, on, what are the forces, what are the factors you're using to choose your arm length?
So for me, it's a function of habit. So my originally learning to swing and just having been reinforced even through my work with Strong First, there was always a discussion around, you can have a slight bend in the elbow. Sometimes mine can get a little bit more so, thankfully, never to like the T-Rex arms. Kind of, but you're allowed to have that slight bend in the elbow. And for me, the big thing that I always check and audit, and in using the video as another objective feedback loop, is does that upper arm at least get parallel to the ground? That's my check. The other piece of why I like to anchor, and I played because I have had the same thoughts, and actually my most recent post, it was in my head, and I was thinking and playing around with it as well, with trying to keep more of that straight or locked out arm when swinging. For me, the challenge with that is that it inevitably turns into me pulling too much with my arms. If I keep a soft elbow, I keep it to where the arms function as just the guide to the bell. It allows the float, and it's the efforts focused on hip drive, and that force production comes from my lower body. If I lock out my arms, I try to force that. I feel myself starting to pull with the arms, and I want to avoid that. So that's where I manage the bend. I want that slight. I'm comfortable with that slight bend in the elbow, but I also want to make sure that I don't force a locked out arm and potentially solve one problem to create another.
Got it. So in the past, you have created another problem.
Yeah. So yeah, I tried for a little while, whereas now I'm going to just really make that concerted effort to keep my arms as straight as possible. But then I felt that creep of pulling through the upper body, and to me, that's a bigger issue than a slight bend in the elbow.
Did it change your, so when we're getting into, let's talk about, some of the big ballistics, and the biggest three that people talk about, certainly the intro skills. We're looking at a swing, we're looking at a clean, we're looking at a snatch. This comes down to which camp you're in. A lot of people think you need to have one lower body propulsion strategy for all three. I personally don't teach that, because you have different destinations. So I think you should have a different lower body strategy. But I'm wondering if in the process of playing with your arm bend, have you changed or noticed a change in your lower body strategy at all? In messing with the arm bend, not a ton, because
once I felt me trying to straighten out the arms was messing with how my swing was going. Because basically, the more I started thinking about my arms being straight, the more I got into my arms pulling, the more my timing also in terms of how I was receiving the bell, how I was sitting back into my hips and being able to drive out of the bottom. It got thrown off. Partly because I was just in my head thinking about a couple things in a movement where I wanted to be present to the whole movement, but it had a cascading effect. So keeping the arms in that bent position, I'll even take it back. It didn't get to the other two ballistics because I wanted to make sure I have my swing down before I even get to doing those other ballistics. I ascribe to the thought process of, your clean and your snatch are just your swing that ends in the rack or overhead. And so if I don't have my swing down, which at that point of playing with my arms being straight, I didn't feel like it was a good time to also now play with the arms being straight, as well as, use whatever that's going to do to your lower body mechanics and apply that to your clean.
Okay. So if we were to get theoretical, obviously you were playing around with it. So it seemed as though there's some implied merit to it. What do you think that implied merit is?
Well, I think it is the potential for you being able to project the bell forward. I think that's one of the things with keeping the arm straight is it does help reinforce that you are actually having that bell project forward, where, if you were to let go, it would seemingly fly across the room.
Sure.
If you're bending at the elbow and you're doing an intentional bend, for me, my soft elbow, I refer to it as that because it's just my arms staying soft. They're not bending intentionally. I can still keep that trajectory going across the room versus pulling it up and having it go more vertical. So that, to me, that's where a lot of the focus on that straight arm comes into play, is that it does reinforce that outward trajectory.
So I think this ties into another thing. I came across one of your posts and you were doing some video breakdown. And this is something I hadn't heard before, but the notion of beating the bell. Mm-hmm. What is that? And is it as violent as it sounds?
No, definitely not as violent as it sounds. Now that you're saying it back to me, like, man, that doesn't sound great.
No. It seems outwardly aggressive for you, man.
Yeah. Yeah, man. No, basically to me, it's what I always refer to as making sure your hips drive before the bell comes out from underneath you. A lot of times you'll see this with people that are swinging and they complain of having some potential low back discomfort from the swing, is that they'll receive the bell, they'll get into their backswing, and the bell will swing out from underneath them before they explode through the hips, before they get that full hip extension. And so they're popping at the hips, but the bell is already a good 3-4 inches in front of them. And to me, beating the bell is when I snap my hips, that bell is getting thrown forward. And basically, I want my hips a millimeter ahead of my bell, so that way I keep it tight until it's ready to be thrown out from underneath me.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I thought that's what you were going through, but this is kind of a big lesson for people. So you then, going back to the original question, when you start playing with your arm, you notice potentially you weren't beating the bell.
Yeah, it threw off my timing of I was breaking at the hips too soon, because now I'm worried about how the path down with the bell is, with my arms trying to stay straight, and then when I'm coming out of it, I wasn't getting that explosion through the hips. I was, like I said before, I was now starting to feel like I'm pulling through the arms, so that's sending the bell ahead of kind of pace for what it should be, and now my hips are out of it. Just everything has a cascading effect to where one domino led to the next, and it just worked itself down the chain. Whereas, because when I was initially introduced to kettlebells, and since then, I've always viewed the arms as just kind of the guide ropes to just get the bell to float and come back down and receive. And when I started putting more intention and more stress to the arms, it took away that feeling of being able to just get that nice, comfortable pop to the hips.
I think that's fascinating, and obviously you can kind of move your hips faster, like the snap of your hips, to get that bell going. But a lot of times in some sometimes in some of my own video breakdowns and like in coaching, you see a lot of people will break those hips too soon. Mm-hmm. And is it just a matter, I mean, like you get weight, but at what point, like how can you articulate this in a way to where it's like, you know, I know we kind of cue like pulling the hips back and that kind of clean up your timing. Is there any suggestions you have for people that have this issue as far as breaking at the hips too early?
So for breaking at the hips too early, I think one of the things that I've done that's helped is I removed the bell from the situation. One of the things that I learned early on, when you put something in somebody's hand, their attention becomes really focused on what's in their hand, and it starts to get away from what the rest of their body's doing. And so if somebody's just they're breaking too early, I'll take the bell away, and because it also takes away some of the threat of their hands coming down at a fast pace towards their pelvis section, like that. You know, yeah.
So they're either the nether regions.
Exactly. Like you want to alleviate some of that concern. So I take that away and I have them go through kind of a stress pull down where I have my hand underneath their hands. They're pushing straight down as if the bell's going to come down. And then I let go and I let their hands snap down and get them to feel what maintaining that locked out position is until their hands hit their hips and they can snap back into the position where they're going to receive the bell, into the backswing. So once I do that, once they get that pattern down, then I reintroduce the bell and see if that can kind of translate into it. The other piece that I've done in the past as well, because typically if you're breaking at the hips too early, there's likely something else that's coming up. And what I've seen is you're also not locking out at the top all that well. So you're not reaching that standing plank. And so I'll use especially if I have access to particularly heavy bells, the static stomp. And so I give them the, 232s or 240s. And I just have them deadlift them up and hold that static, tall position, getting tall, getting to feel that lockout, and then put those bells down and step over to what they're going to swing, and then get into repeating that. So I address it from the top lockout, because if they're breaking at the hips too early, they're likely not locking out as well. And then I also take away the bell and just get them to feel what maintaining it is in a safer environment.
Awesome. Cool.
I've got a question about some of your programming. So I come across in your style the ideas of complementing and not competing. Mm-hmm. Do you have a baseline idea of let's work with like the big 6 kettlebell skills? Mm-hmm. Do you have kind of a point counterpoint how you like to program those? Which lifts complement which? For example, will you not swing and snatch on the same day? If you mm-hmm. snatch, then do you not press? What's your thought around that?
Yeah, the complement don't compete. They can create that. I'll look at it on a movement pattern basis, but also on the organization of my training session on the training day. So on the movement pattern basis, the simplest way I look at it is from where it will fit nicely into this realm. And so with some of the lifts, it just won't. This doesn't fit as nicely, but kind of alternating the push and pull from the upper and lower body. So, if I'm swinging, if I'm doing something hip dominant, I pair that with more of a push beat on the upper body, so going swings into presses, or if I'm just focusing on my lower body, swings into squats where it's that lower body push. So and that's the basics. Again, it doesn't always line up that easily in terms of the patterns matching. But then I look at the overall session structure and I see what's my primary target for that training session, and then I organize the remaining lifts around it to where it's not going to rob from that primary target. So if my primary target is heavy swings at a moderately high volume, part of the organization of not creating that competition between the lifts is having that come up early, having anything that's surrounding it not impact my ability to get full expression, full capacity and strength out of my hips. And then the rest of the day can go into anything else that may compete, but it's not going to compete with my primary target for that training session. And so that's where the complement don't compete comes into play. I want to do it on the movement pattern basis. So alternating those push pulls, and then also on the training organization of the day where I have my prioritization of my primary lifts up front make sure that what I want to do is first and foremost, and then anything else that's going to, like any of the accessory lifts, so to speak, will come after the fact. So that way, if it's at a lower intensity, but it is still hip dominant, it's not going to rob from my primary focus.
Are you now, obviously if you're doing a swing, you're especially your swing, because you get back there pretty far, so you're going hinge dominant or hip dominant rather. Are you classifying that as a pull? Do you classify a swing as a pull? Okay. I do. Do you think it's the same for everybody?
That everybody should classify it as a pull?
Yeah.
I mean, I typically view the majority of hip dominant, pretty much all hip dominant movements, as a pull. So the short answer is yes. If you're getting a little more knee dominant, and again, this is where you can get into the nuance of where you're driving your force. So if you're staying a little more vertical, if you're driving, being a little more upright in terms of your drive out of the swing, I can definitely get into the discussion of whether that's a lower push or a lower pull. But typically, if you're really getting focused on the hips, I just for simplicity's sake, categorize that as a pull.
That's fair. That's fair. Brett Jones has a neat article talking about, is a swing a push or a pull? I've had some really fun conversations with people that usually last a long time about whether it is or it isn't, and I haven't made my mind up yet. I think probably varies. I'm just curious.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think there's merit to both sides of the argument, because I haven't read. I've seen. I haven't read the article from Brett, but if you think about it, like how you're driving your force, if you're driving your feet through the floor and you're getting kind of standing tall, getting that quick vertical displacement, I can also see that as an argument for it being under the push category.
Well, that's the gist of the article. You don't need to read it now.
Oh, fair. Okay.
Luck, save you some time there for some more training,
Another interesting piece. It was actually one of the master instructors at Equinox, and we had a really great conversation. He and I are built very differently. So I'm like 85% torso, and he's about 85% leg. And when you look at both the physics and also the fact that I've got quite a barrel chest, the sensations I feel are a lot more pushing than pulling. Just when you look at how the force lines up and where my arms are actually meeting my body and the sensations I feel, it's kind of a neat thing. I was just curious. You got anything else, Jeremiah?
Oh man, I mean, I could go on for hours. This is a good conversation, and Matt, I've probably talked to you drunkenly for hours in the past, but I don't have anything else. Is there any other questions from the crowd?
I have something to say. I don't really have any questions.
Okay.
First, I wanted to say I like what you had to say about the bend or the slight bend in your arm on the swings. I thought that how it takes the focus off of bringing your arms up and pulling the bell more. I thought that was really good.
Nice.
Secondly, or technically it was first, but the flow. And I'm assuming also when you guys are talking about flow, it's not like juggling, throwing the bell, but actual movements, correct?
Well, that's kind of tricky.
Okay.
Everything kind of spills over.
Well, I'm gonna talk about. I like the flow, like movements, juggling the bell. I'm not into that. I like watching it though. I like flow, but I use it more as, like you said, fun. I definitely don't think it's strength building. Rhino's strength is crazy with his 40 plus kg bells, but I think it's good to warm up with. And then also I like to pair it sometimes at the end of a workout if I've done those movements individually. But I think you're right. I think people see it and they grab 3 kg bells and start throwing them around. And it's like, yeah, I'm using kettlebells and woo, look at me. But so I think it can get a bad rap because of that. But I mean, if you're just using it for like fun and warming up or cooling down or whatever, I think it's cool. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'll take the step back. It's one of the things that I've through my trajectory of being a fitness professional and being in the industry for the number of years that I've tried to really take a concerted effort on. However anybody wants to move and train and express their body, 1000% get after it. Like, and that's where, like, I called out, like, to me, training is all I use the model like play, practice, train to categorize like what I'm going to focus on. But to me, it's all, I categorize under the umbrella of all play. Like it's truly enjoyable for me. And if you love like getting into the kettlebell flows, 100% they get into it. And it's exactly what you called out. Like, it's my quote unquote issue with it is when people they've never touched kettlebell before in their life, and suddenly they're grabbing that, light kettlebell and like throwing it all around and doing all this, doing
for the gram,
I think that's what it's supposed to be. But yeah, I mean, like I've called out, like, man, if you love waking up every morning and doing Zumba, awesome. Like there's worse things in the world that you can do than move rhythmically and have fun and getting your heart rate elevated. Like there's a whole host of health benefits that come from those three elements. And also the group element of being with other people in the room with you. Now, I'll never do a Zumba class because I suck at dancing. But if you got that skill set, 100% get after it.
He's talking to you, Roger. He's talking directly to you.
I'm thinking Zumba, kettlebells. What do you think?
Kumba?
Look, I think it comes down to, the right or wrong, good or bad is really it's a silly discussion. There really is no place for it. I think if we restrict our conversations to goals, training stimulus, this does that. If you want to achieve this, we have some relevant data that suggests that if you do this with this type of load this many times, this is what's going to happen. So the value judgments are generally useless. And the mockery and the making fun is generally useless. It can be fun, but there are so many reasons to make fun of human beings rather than how they swing kettlebells. So get a little more creative. But yeah, it's okay. We just need to restrict. We need to restrict our conversations, I think, to what does this do?
I'm just saying, you can probably ask my wife, and she'll come up with at least 20 different things you can make fun of me for.
Exactly.
Wives are good for that, I guess.
19.5 of them are absolutely correct.
I'd say that's the same. I mean, coming back to something you mentioned at the beginning, Matt, and this is something that we as coaches at Iron Revival, and I suspect a lot of people that will watch or listen to this, it's the why. Why are you doing it? If you're working on a flow or working on specific strength skills or whatever, and why you're doing the things that you're doing, then it's good. If you're, if it is play, if it is intentional training, if it is, practicing a specific skill, I think there's value in all of that. Don't be a jackass though, and grab your 3 kilo belt and think you're impressing everybody when you're really not. You're just making it look weird.
Well, I think something happens when you get over 100,000 followers on Instagram and you've never used kettlebells. I think something happens in the brain where they think they really need to start picking them up and using them. These are my favorite.
The push-ups next to a kettlebell.
I had a guy. Was it you, Carrie? Someone sent me. I think it was Carrie sent me this guy. I don't know. He had like 4.6 million followers, and he had a post about kettlebells not being good for glute hypertrophy. And that is completely opposite to my experience. And if anyone needs photographic,
check out his shorts.
I'll happily show you. But the idea, the guy does a post with just wretched swings. I mean, there are like 50 things that are wrong with them. Guy doesn't know what he's doing, and then he gets into his junk science and his bad biomechanics that just are not accurate. And I think that's the stuff we need to have no patience for. Not valid expression that may be a little different than ours.
Yeah,
we should put that post in a newsletter.
Yeah, we should do a whole one of these just on all this craziness. I mean, ultimately everybody's favorite thing to do is show you how to not do a swing and then show you how to do it right, but still do it wrong or not, who knows. But hey, look, I clean my kitchen with a kettlebell every day, so I consider that kettlebell cleaning, and you should too. Does anybody else have any questions or anything they want to add?
No, I think we're solid. Thanks for your time.
Great.
I appreciate the cleaning joke at the end to wrap that up.
I'm good for dad jokes here and there. You know what I'm saying? Well, hey, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and by all means, be sure to check out Matt. He's a wealth of knowledge. He's got some good posts up on the Instagram and wherever he's training. If you happen to come across him, be sure to get a session with him. I, for one, passed my SFG the first time. I'm not saying it's all due to you, Matt, but it was a great way to start. And tune in every week for these conversations we have, and we appreciate you all for checking it out and taking the time to join us as well. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you guys for having me.
Right.
It was great.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
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 Bye.